The question whether objective truth can be attributed to human thinking is not a question of theory, but it's a practical question. These words represent one of the key ideas behind Karl Marx's philosophy, namely the priority of material world over the ideal one. Even though at the beginning of his career Marx was a convinced Hegelian, he soon realized that if any change in our world was possible, this couldn't possibly come from a theory. Therefore, he famously says, "The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it." Through these words, Marx brings in history a revolutionary turn destined to have a massive ideological impact in the following century. The history is no longer something to observe passively, but actively shape it, not through our thoughts, but through our actions. And the final result of this historical progress is the advent of communism. This idea has been broadly interpreted and often misunderstood, hiding its true meaning. What is this meaning? And what are the ground ideas behind it? In this video, we will attempt to answer these questions. With Hegel as the leading German idealist, the 19th century witnessed what was considered the culmination of philosophy. On the one hand, because Hegel interpreted the history as a process with ultimate purpose, in which different historical phases correspond to progressive development of understanding. On the other hand, because with Hegel, metaphysics reached its peak, establishing a system capable of justifying everything based on one single rational principle. At the beginning of his career, Marx was a strong supporter of Hegel. The key question for him during this early phase was, indeed, is a new beginning of philosophy possible after Hegel? According to Marx, not only is it possible, but it is necessary because it is precisely in such moments, as Epicurus did after Plato and Aristotle, that philosophy can reconnect with reality and realize itself in the external world. Initially, in line with Hegelian thought, Marx viewed this change as purely theoretical, taking the form of a rational critique of the present situation. However, around 1843, when he started working as a journalist after abandoning his academic career, Marx became convinced of the fundamental role of material interest in social life. Yet, still influenced by Hegelian thought, he considered theory itself a force. He writes, "The weapon of criticism cannot replace the criticism of weapons. Material force must be overthrown by material force, but theory also becomes a material force when it seizes the masses." Marx also shared Hegel's idea that modern civil society, made up of individuals and social classes, is driven by interests and needs. However, he rejected the thesis that the state represents the resolution of the conflict between individual and general interest, where bureaucracy becomes the universal class capable of acting in the interest of all. According to Marx, history tends toward the realization of democracy, understood as the highest possible participation in legislative power through the broadest extension of voting rights. However, political emancipation alone is insufficient. It represents merely a formal and abstract equality before the law, hiding a real inequality, namely the economic and social disparity. Marx argues that the much celebrated human rights declared by the American and French revolutions actually concealed a mystification. What is this mystification? The idea that the essence of man is the individual as defined by the bourgeois society. The bourgeoisie, or the middle class, as property owners, are driven by particular interests hostile to other people, whom they perceive as limitation to their own freedom. Marx wrote, "The more the ruling class is able to absorb the best elements of the oppressed class, the stronger and more dangerous its rule becomes." Thus, the political emancipation achieved through the French Revolution is not enough. What is needed is a complete human emancipation. And this can be only achieved through what Marx called as the universal class, a class that has not suffered a specific injustice, but total injustice. As a result, this class does not claim a particular right, but can emancipate itself only by emancipating all other social spheres. For Marx, this universal class was the proletariat, or the working class. In this sense, philosophy must be practically realized, and theory becomes a material force when it takes hold of this working class. For Marx, the proletariat is the force capable of leading a revolution. You can clearly see that what began as an ideal question, then a political and a social one, now became a metaphysical, not in an idealistic sense like Hegel, but in a pragmatic one. To understand Marx's metaphysics, we must examine his studies from the 1843 to the 1844, when he read Engels' important text, Outline of a Critique of Political Economy. The central idea of this work was a radical critique of capitalism. Influenced by this text and the meticulous reading of economists such as Smith or Ricardo, Marx published the economic and philosophic manuscripts, in which he focused on three main issues: the critique of classical economics, the critique of Hegelian dialectics, and the description of communism. To identify the laws governing industrial movement and explain, based on them, the formation of the proletariat, Marx first needed to analyze the premises of the classical economics. According to Adam Smith, the economy was a system of harmonious relationships, on which natural order, widespread happiness and social harmony were based. From his perspective, conflicts were merely accidental, so economic laws should be formulated without considering them. These laws, aligned with those of capitalist production, were thus seen as immutable and eternal, and private property was simply accepted as given without the need to further justification. In contrast, Marx argued that the economy was a terrain conflict where contradictions were not accidental but essential. He wrote, "There is no progress without conflict. This is the law that civilization has followed to this day. Industrial society accumulates wealth in direct proportion to the impoverishment of the vast majority of the population. Political economy, by ignoring the relationship between the worker and their labor and production, conceals the alienation that characterized the labor in the modern industrial society." What is this alienation, which identifies Marx's radical critique of capitalism? The term alienation was introduced by Hegelian philosophy, and it literally means becoming other, or in a broader sense, surrendering what is one's own to someone else. In the capitalist production, according to Marx, alienation takes on multiple interconnected aspects. First, alienation concerns the worker's relationship with the product of their labor. The product becomes an external entity that does not belong to the worker, but is instead exclusively property of the capitalist for whom they work. Marx writes, "The more the worker expands himself in labor, the more powerful the alien world he creates against himself becomes. The poorer he himself becomes in his inner world, and the less he belongs to himself. Second, in productive activity, the workers become estranged from themselves, as they do not see their labor as part of their real life. Their true life takes place elsewhere, at home, outside of work, and independent of the labor that is under the command of an external power. Finally, in capitalist production, the worker loses their Gattungswesen, or species being, which for Marx defines the very essence of humanity." And this last point leads us directly to Marx's metaphysical perspective. By Gattungswesen, he refers to the being that realizes itself historically through its belonging to the human species. It is in this way that man completes his essence. And what is this essence? Labor, the defining activity that distinguishes humans from animals and establishes their fundamental relationship with nature. Marx writes, "Labor, life activity, productive life itself, appears to man only as a means for the satisfaction of a need, the need to maintain physical existence. But productive life is a life as a species being. It is the life that generates life. The nature of a species lies in its mode of life activity, and free conscious activity is the characteristics of human species being. Life itself appears only as a means to live." Why is this a metaphysical perspective? Because humans relate to the world and realize their essence through the labor, which becomes the defining human activity. Consequently, reality appears to the worker, or homo faber as Marx defines humans, as mere material to be transformed. Through labor driven by needs, humans externalize their capacity and appropriate nature itself. This process does not happen individually, but in cooperation with others, creating an essential connection that forms a community. The problem with capitalism, however, is that labor becomes merely a means of individual survival. This leads to alienation not only from work, but also from other human beings. The organic unity of humanity is shattered by private property, which separates humans from their activities and their products, making them appear as something alien and no longer their own. According to Marx, both Hegel and classic economists acknowledge that labor is the defining characteristics of human essence. However, they only recognize its positive sides. For economists, labor is something natural, without historical development. Hegel, on the other hand, correctly identified the historical nature of labor. For Hegel, the spirit or Geist expresses the true essence of humanity. Since the spirit is the self-production of itself, the true human is also a product of their own labor. This self-production is a process of development. The spirit externalizes itself in the world, becomes alienated, and then returns to itself, enriched by all the determinations acquired in this process. The labor of the spirit is thus a process of alienation and de-alienation, but this process occurs only in thought. It is the history of self-consciousness. This is the aspect that Marx rejects. While Hegel deserves credit for recognizing that human essence can be lost, alienation, and recovered, de-alienation, in other words, that human essence is historical and self-produced through labor, he made the mistake of conceiving this process in a purely idealistic manner, as a spiritual development concerning only thought. For Marx, it's necessary to invert Hegel's dialectic, putting it back on its feet. This means recognizing that for humans, objectivity is an intrinsic and inescapable condition. It cannot be just a negation, because humans have a constitutive relationship with nature. In this sense, humans are natural beings, intrinsically connected to nature. But at the same time, humans are historical beings who can overcome alienation and reclaim their essence. This essence includes objectification, namely the transformation of nature through labor in cooperation with others. Private property, according to Marx, is the material, tangible expression of human life estranged from itself. Therefore, the abolition of private property and the social relations based on it will coincide with the abolition of all alienation. The solution to alienation, then, is the communism, in which productive activity becomes the full realization of human essence. Marx writes, "Communism is the actual suppression of private property as the self-alienation of man. It is the true resolution of the conflict between man and nature, between man and man, the true resolution of the conflict between existence and essence, between objectification and subjective affirmation, between freedom and necessity, between the individual and the species." Marx sharply contrasts his conception of communism with the crude forms of communism that advocate the return to a primitive, needless existence. These forms propose an equalization downward, erasing individual differences and cultural advancements. Instead, for Marx, true communism is the reappropriation of human essence in all the richness of the historical development. It's the total liberation and realization of human faculties. This means that technological and cultural advancements from previous eras are not lost. They remain available for a different type of society, which can reclaim and repropose them in a future communist world. However, historical progress is not simply technological progress. Although technological development improves humanity's relationship with nature, it's only a necessary condition for the realization of human essence, not a sufficient condition. Human essence also includes social relations, which determine how technology is used. In communism, therefore, human activity will be characterized by freedom and universality, namely the absence of coercion in social relationships, and maximum control over nature, allowing the greatest possible satisfaction of human needs. Marx famously summarizes this idea in his well-known principle, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. However, communism is not an abstract utopia or an idealistic vision or some utopian socialist belief. Instead, it is the historical outcome of the development of history itself, a phenomenon whose genesis must be sought in the material movement of history. Thank you for watching this video. I'm Ivan and this is Empyrean, the Academy of Philosophy and Fine Arts.